Greetings, ladies and mentalgets, and welcome to this latest episode of Tales from Outer Space, where I take a space-related story from around the internet and read it out loud for your enjoyment. All the relevant links are down below. Please don't forget to do the usual YouTube gumph, because if you don't, the nanite swarms will steal your other sock. But more importantly, as always, I hope that you enjoy. I'd quickly like to thank the following Tier 5 patrons and channel members for supporting the channel: Datamagnet and Bob the Dragon. Thank you very much. Chaos Doctrine, written by AloneDoughnut. Eleron was an awful planet, on the outer edge of the Goldilocks zone with a red star, hot enough that water remained unfrozen, especially on a planet which had a surface of 93% water, but not so hot that anywhere on the land could be considered topical. The native fish species were barely edible, and the fauna was worse. Only volcanic chains of islands poked above the surface, and those were constantly battered and eroded by the ceaseless storms, and smashed upon by the errant icebergs. Most wouldn't consider it hospitable for prisoners, let alone children. The Daiku, on the other hand, had seen fit to turn it into a military academy, close to the equator where it wasn't as cold. The oligarchs had seen fit to build on a set of islands, and the best and the brightest minds of the upper house would go to learn to be commanders they were born to be. Naval tactician Orion hated Eleron more than any other posting, a testimony to his time spent there. He did not want to stay on that water-soaked rock, but to leave you had to prove that you were worthy. If you weren't truly worthy, they would eventually send you back to teach there. His classroom was full of cadets, themselves children of upper houses who sought their own glory in the empire. The oligarchy of the Daiku was, after all, an empire with 3 emperors of different name. Fleet tactics was the class of the semester, focusing on how to use tactics of other races to overcome those races. It was a few weeks into training, and the students were tiring of his class. After all, in close quarters training they learned to use a dagger and fist. In marksmanship they shot, in the galactic affairs they debated. But fleet tactics, in this class they merely read. And not from tablets, but from printed materials in books, some of which were as old as the founding of this facility. Children wanted adventure. His digipen met the board, and he wrote the lesson of the day: mammalian conflict, dealing with warm-blooded foes. Already some children yawned, and he could feel their hand raised to the air. He turned to find the pupil in question, one Cadet Magali of the House Qua, a bright girl, but one with more questions than answers. "Yes, Cadet," Zorion pointed to her. His tone was tired and without real interest. "Naval tactician, since we are going to discuss mammalians, are we going to discuss humans?" She blinked all 4 eyes in anticipation, and a hush fell over the room. Beaks clicked and feathers rustled. Of course they wanted to know about the space apes. Who wouldn't? "No!" His response was uninterested still, annoyed now, and he turned back to the board to write his notes. Another voice cut him off, however. "Sir, they're undefeated. Surely they would be a worthy case study." Zorion sighed as the murmur flew through the crowd. More questions echoed through the stone halls, lost to the growing din, before he could finally turn his back around and regarded the room coldly. Silence fell again, eyes transfixed on him. To his part, he watched them in turn, and he knew that, with news from the front lines that humanity had joined the Cardalian War, predicting a victory for Cardalia and the Empire, they would be interested. Every blasted news channel was talking as though the fighting was over. He resigned himself to this fact and placed the pen down. 2 paces forward, and then sound of talon on polished stone, and he considered his words. "Cadet Cadio, tell me, where is the best place to command a battle from?" The cadet in question stood, his feathers folding flat. Sure, that much simple question could be a trick. Still, he answered plainly. From the bridge of the command ship, naval technician. When the aged Daiku didn't immediately say anything, he continued, the Singarian battleship would be ideal, but with its equipped bridge and communications equipment. Zarian nodded and turned to another section of the room. Cadet Paco, tell me, against the Hyuxian fleets, what would you say is the best deployment of vessels? Now he wanted to see how much he had studied the conflict, a test in real time. The cadet stood, flattening his subdued pink uniform. He straightened. Currently, sir, considering recent tactics deployed by the Hyuxians, I would deploy 6 task forces, each commanded by a Sygarian, as suggested by Cadet Cadell. I would deploy 4 cruisers, 10 destroyers, and 2 artillery cruisers with each. Lastly, I would command from a carrier, such as the DOWS Skybreaker. My own task force composed of 6 cruisers and 8 frigates. He paused to consider his words for a moment, and concluded with, as Hyuxians focused fast ships and hit-and-run tactics, this would make quick work of any ship they sent at my numbers. I could devastate their supply lines and render them ineffective. He swallowed hard, then seated himself. Zarian nodded. Excellent, a solid strategy, and very similar to the one your father deployed at the Battle of Zoya Prime. You study well, fledgling. He looked around the room, and his head cocked. Yet those tactics proved useless. The Hyuxians adapted. They too have studied our ways, and are adjusting, as it is war. Hence the stalemate we find ourselves in. One of you called out that humans are undefeated. Why is that? Confused looks bounced around. Truth was, little was known about the human conflicts. They preferred to stay out of conflict and global affairs as a whole. A mere 2 years ago, the Hyuxians were some of the strongest trading partners, and now they had joined the conflict against them. One student stood, and Zarian turned to regard her. Their use of electronic warfare and EMP weapons, this coupled with their fleet still making use of kinetic weapons, means that they are hard to counter effectively. Most people underestimate them since they don't mobilize large fleets. Zarian shook his head. Another stood in her place. Then, it has to be their use of stealth technology. Their ships can remain undetected at great range. They get in close and strike, all before anyone can retaliate. Again, the naval tactician shook his head. None of these, he responded, and yet all of these. You are studying past human tactics. Their EW ships were used in the first human Xeno War, and their heavy use of stealth ships made the War of the Orion Arm was notable. But both of those strategies are moves we have only seen them do once. No, there is only one true strategy employed by humans, and that is the Chaos Doctrine. Another murmur filled the room. This time, an almost excited energy accompanied it. Zarian allowed it to continue for a moment, waving his hand through the air, bringing hollow projectors to life, and in the middle of that space above his head, a vessel appeared. This is the United Human Nations warship, specifically the UNS Spearhead, a Ticonderoga class battleship. She has 8 dorsal-mounted mass driver turrets, for 4 barrels apiece, 6 ventral mounted of the same, 10 and 10-point defense cannons and a dorsal and ventral hull as well, 15 flak cannons along the bout line, and 4 forward torpedo deployment systems, 2 aft. The sloped armor means that if you're dumb enough to position a ship broadside to this vessel, all 14 of its cannons can hit you, and all 14 have a completely vertical firing path. This ship projects power. What is it missing? Discussions broke out. People studied the sharp angles. Armor meant to deflect laser and kinetic weapons fire alike. Its massive engines mounted at the rear were augmented with a pair at the front and small wings on the bow. one of the few weapon blind spots. It could crawl, even if one disabled those rear engines. But the naval tactician had asked. There had to be something missing. One cadet approached and manipulated the model, turning it along the Z-axis, studying it as it spun. Naval technician, where is the bridge? This earned him a pleased pat on the head. Humans do not have exposed bridges. Their command and control center is located in the center, far from the hull. They rely on their heavy sensor technology to see. This isn't to say that they don't have spotting rooms, should they need, but they are small and rely on people transmitting back to the commander and the gunners if they need. This has led to one of their most shocking tactics. The display shifted, and a Kylan dreadnought was displayed, surrounded by debris. Its hull was riddled with holes. Drifting slowly away from it was a conning tower, atop of which sat a bridge. Human tactics dictate that when engaging with aliens, Xenos, as they call us, they immediately fire to disable the shields, and then do not target any other systems. Their ships focus fire at the base of the bridge tower. If none is present, they hammer the bridge itself. Feathers rustled, and the din erupted. It was madness. Why attack the bridge when there were weapons emplacements, engines, critical systems? All this did was kill the command crew. Slowly, though, the din fell into silence as it dawned on the classroom. Guns could be repaired, engines reignited, critical systems replaced. But the best commanders a species had, how did one counter that? It was centuries-old tradition to be able to see the battlefield, something every other species mirrored, every other species but humans. How do we fight this, naval technician? Came a meek question from the rear of the room. Sarai merely hung his head and stooped his shoulders, his standard sign of surrender. Sure, they could adapt, but humans had made their fleets to fight themselves before they discovered other species. They were used to fighting blind, fighting dirty. Their tactics changed by the day, and they seemed to study every other species, adding the tactics to their own. Tablets vibrated, news flashes coming through. Normally, this would draw ire from the instructor, but he let it slide. The Hyraxians had surrendered. Not a single shot had been fired by the human forces. Their ships arrived at the front lines, and the commanders surrendered. In the face of chaos, unable to predict what was going to happen, the Hyraxians opted to simply lay down their guns. How did you predict an enemy with no rulebook, who made it up as they went along, who laughed in the face of tradition? And so, humanity was undefeated still. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.